The next time somebody says, oh, the Jews have this conspiracy, they have this plan. What are you talking about? What do you mean? What, they all get together and they want to implement this plan? The next time somebody asks you that or they're skeptical, look up.
We turn now to a new report in the New York Times that takes a deep dive into Project Esther.
So this is Project Esther.
So when Project Esther comes in.
And now with Project Esther.
A prime example of this is the Heritage Foundation's Project Esther.
They released this Project Esther, a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism.
Project Esther aims to rebrand all critics of Israel and pro-Palestinian protesters as providing material support for terrorism. So that means that anyone who's ever participated in a pro-Palestinian protest at a university, for example, is potentially providing material support and should be fired or deported or otherwise ostracized from what they call open society.
Following the events of October 7th, Project Esther was founded on the one-year anniversary in 2024 by a conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. Formulated as a direct response to the Hamas attack on Israel, not as a military operation, but to tackle the perceived driving force, anti-Semitism. Project Esther portrays October 7th as an unmasking moment, writing, Hamas's October 7th, 2023 terrorist attack on Israel laid bare this existing and underlying anti-Semitism around the world, including in the United States. Named after the biblical heroine, Esther, the namesake of the project, is in direct reference to the Bible story, wherein Esther thwarts a plan of a wicked advisor named Haman, who is seeking to pursue a personal vendetta against the Jews by having a royal decree issued that would bring about their destruction.
The name is a dead giveaway, Project Esther. Of course, that's in reference to the Bible story.
Yeah.
They actually reference the Bible story and they go over the Bible story, including the quote, so many Hamans and only one Purim. We are all Haman. I mean, they've had, Hitler is Haman, Hamas is Haman. Now the American citizens are Haman, aka the enemy of the Jews that they need to do mass slaughter to. So,
laying the foundation for the primary purpose of Project Esther, employ a national strategy in the United States through public-private partnerships to suppress, censor, and dismantle all anti-Zionist organizations, which they define as being part of a broader, highly organized global Hamas Support Network, or HSN for short. So what is this Hamas Support Network? Well, according to the Heritage Foundation, they defined it inside America as the people and organizations that are both directly and indirectly involved in furthering Hamas's cause and contravention of American values and to the detriment of American citizens and America's national security interests. And there lies the problem. A definition so broad-reaching it includes anyone who has attended or otherwise vocally supported any pro-Palestinian movement.
Project Esther says they are going to get a Republican government in power. They're going to wait for a Republican to become the president, for Republicans to control the House and the Senate. Once they do, there will be a public-private partnership, meaning government with the private sector, to label anybody that has protested Israel, anybody that supported Palestine, any campus groups, activists. We're going to label all of them as terrorists. We're going to say they're a Hamas Support Network. That's the acronym they came up with, an HSN. If you're pro-Palestine, if you're an activist protesting, writing essays, you're on the campus, you're a Hamas Support Network. Hamas are terrorists. You're a terrorist. They said, and once we get our favorable Republican government, we're going to use immigration law, national security laws like terrorist laws. We're going to use education laws, basically everything that's on the books to go after these people.
According to the document, organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, and even Jewish Voice for Peace are part of a so-called Hamas Support Network that allegedly challenges Israel's security and also threatens American values.
even though they haven't broken any laws. They're not actually engaging with Hamas stuff. They just say you're associated with a terrorist organization to make people go along with having you deported or criminally charged. Because if they slap terrorism on you, if they associate with you with a terrorist organization, and we've been fed this terrorist fear-mongering since 9/11, people would be more than happy to see you locked up, and they won't even question it. They won't even ask, what did this person actually do? Why are they being locked up? They won't ask that because they'll just label you a terrorist.
Arguing that any person or group, even those that, quote, merely use this issue cynically in the furtherance of other goals, are effectively a part of a terrorist support network, even going so far as to say, those supporters of Palestine and Hamas who have claimed for decades that criticizing Israel's policies does not equate to anti-Semitism are at best insincere. They have simply masked their anti-Semitism in a thin veneer of political rhetoric to disguise their true intent, the destruction of the Jewish state of Israel. Put simply is the framing that any criticism of Israel is in fact anti-Semitism. But it's not just Jews that should be concerned. Project Esther argues that the Hamas Support Network is embedded with numerous other leftist activist groups like the LGBTQ and BLM, meaning that they share anti-American Marxist framing, implying that they have parallel goals that are against the interests of the average American, therein shoring up their line of reasoning for why every American should support Project Esther. Because communism.
One of the groups that Project Esther identifies, as she refers to it, as a Hamas Support Organization, HSO. Also, they refer to HSN's Hamas Support Network. If you can talk more about that label.
Yeah, so Project Esther focuses on anti-Zionist groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace, but they aim to go much more broader than that. So there's a whole network, according to them, that includes not just those groups, but large nonprofits like the Tides Foundation, George Soros as a mastermind on top of this pyramid that they showed in pitch decks to potential donors. Then, of course, there's colleges and universities that are harboring these organizations, members of Congress, senators, the media, really anybody, like I said before, who has criticized Israel or participated in any sort of pro-Palestinian activity.
It's as if the Heritage Foundation has declared that any criticism of Israel is not only unpatriotic, but also a direct threat to national security. And the result, a cascade of policies that could see peaceful protesters prosecuted, funding for universities slashed, and even non-citizens and permanent residents deported with their visas and green cards revoked.
Deport them, surveil them, put them in prison, financially sanction them, ostracize them, and this is a quote, ostracize them from society. Basically expel them, cancel them from social life. Now that President Trump is in office with a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, with Zionists at HHS, at the Department of Education, at DHS, at the State Department, Zionists in the White House, they're executing that project to a letter. The New York Times did a report. They said the Trump administration is implementing 50% of the policies prescribed in Project Esther.
Beyond dismantling the Hamas Support Network and anti-Semitism, Project Esther also outlines a clear and distinct third goal: protecting America's long-standing policy of support for Israel. Explicitly stating, with a successful completion of Project Esther and with the HSN ceasing to exist, they will not be able to generate any political pressure on the U.S. government or the U.S.-Israel relationship. A far cry from the intended purpose of the First Amendment. This is perhaps the most notable development historically, as since October 7th, American support for Israel has drastically reduced, especially among the younger generations.
And so that they will implement a pro-Israel curriculum in their Middle East Studies department. Wow. And there's two purposes for this. It's pretty transparent. One, if the United States is giving Israel billions of dollars to annihilate the civilian population, if the United States is maybe going to war with Iran, where would you expect to see a popular or grassroots protest against that stuff? College campuses. So when you shut down the college campuses, you're clearing the way for the United States to support these wars without any opposition. Billions of dollars in missiles and maybe a ground war, regime change war in Iran. And all the protests have been silenced preemptively. That's number one. Number two, Harvard, UPenn, Columbia, all these elite schools. The students that graduate from those schools go on to work for the top law firms, the top hedge funds. They work on Wall Street, in the Foreign Service, and the State Department. If the Middle East studies departments at these schools are teaching that Israel is genociding Palestine, guess who's running the State Department in a generation? People that aren't very sympathetic to Israel. Same thing with Wall Street. Same thing with every other elite institution. I mean, these schools are elite-making institutions. So they want to make sure the curriculum is pro-Israel so that the elites are pro-Israel, so that every generation of students that goes into the highest levels of society, they see it exactly one way.
I see the younger protesters are largely anti-Israel, and I see right now there is no message conveyed to young people why they should support Israel, and I'm not saying that I do. I'm asking them, what are you paying attention to? Now I'll tell you this. My having left this meeting is they're clueless to the issue. They don't know, despite the fact there was literally a protest outside, they were dismissive of. They say these things happen. The trends that I see are younger people are increasingly anti-Israel, and on the right, they're relatively neutral or don't care. My prediction, as I made over a year ago, is that with the anti-war elements of the populist movement on the right and the anti-Israel section of the left, not to mention there is a smaller but still prominent anti-Israel right, Israel's not going to have support from this country in 20 years. The U.S. is going to say, we've got two factions. Young people on the right who are following in the footsteps of MAGA populist movement, who don't want to fund foreign wars, they vote no on Israel. The far left that hates Israel, they vote no on Israel. Israel, you get no funding anymore.
So how exactly does Project Esther plan to accomplish these goals? Well, in addition to invoking FARA, RICO, and co-opting Middle Eastern education across the country, they highlight a public-private partnership when a willing administration occupies the White House, directly referencing the numerous statements they make about the Biden-Harris administration's failures to implement a strategy of their own. But now we have Trump. While the full report from Project Esther has been posted online for months, the noise around it didn't start to pick up until the Trump administration began taking action against universities, such as the detainment of Columbia protester Mahmoud Khalil and the plainclothes arrest of Rumeysa Ozturk. And as Katie Baker, an investigative correspondent for the New York Times, puts it, whether knowingly or unknowingly, it appears to all those with eyes to see that Trump has begun implementing Project Esther.
How has the Trump administration begun to fulfill some of the objectives outlined by the Heritage Foundation's Project Esther?
So I want to be clear that the Trump administration would not speak with me for this story, and Heritage says it could just be a coincidence that they don't know if they're actually following the blueprint. But according to my analysis, the Trump administration and other Republicans have called for more than half of the actionable goals in Project Esther, or they appear to have called for them at least. And so I think it's worth looking at the document in full to have an idea of what else we might see coming down the line.
You write in the piece, Project Esther's architects envisioned outcomes that at the time might have seemed far-fetched. Now, 4 months after Trump has taken office, Heritage Foundation leaders are taking an early victory lap.
Yeah, so again, they won't say for sure. And if you recall last year, Project 2025 was so contentious. It became such a big talking point during the election campaign that Trump had to distance himself from it. So they're very careful to keep their distance from each other. But they do say that they meet regularly with officials from the administration. And Mr. Greenway said to me that it was no coincidence that we're seeing actions such as billions of dollars withheld to universities for federal funding. We're seeing calls to monitor the social media of immigrants for quote unquote anti-Semitic activity. We're seeing the attempts to deport people who have criticized Israel or argued for Palestinian rights. And so all of that is very clearly laid out in Project Esther.
And what Republican lawmakers are involved in formulating the objectives of Project Esther?
I think there's a really broad brush. You see people in the administration, Republicans in Congress. It's really hard to just pick one or two because it's really widespread.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us. The response of Project Esther to your report, the Heritage Foundation people behind it?
I haven't heard from them, but I think they're very explicit that this is what they're doing.
It's a move that raises eyebrows and questions alike. How can they designate a peaceful protest as dangerous when it's just an exercise of the same freedom that the US prides itself on? Yet, under this new regime, any activism against the US-Israel alliance might soon be branded as a threat to national security. The influence of the Heritage Foundation runs deep in these policies. The reports like Project 2025 and Project Esther serve as manuals for conservative lawmakers and even military officials. They urge officials to take cues directly from their recommendations, turning independent policy making into a one-man show, where outside ideological influence dictate the nation's direction. This situation brings us to a stark realization. American politics is at a crossroads. When a leading think tank can mold government policy to such an extent, it blurs the lines between independent policymaking and partisan agenda setting.
Project Esther paints liberal civil society groups as a Hamas Support Network without any proof. A recent Trump administration executive order seeks to turn universities into immigration enforcers. These actions divide communities and waste critical resources that could be used more practically to tackle actual anti-Semitism in this country. The demonizing of vital institutions in Esther is now starting to come out in the mouths of our cabinet secretaries, like Secretary Kennedy, who just this week called universities greenhouses for this deadly pestilence of so-called woke cancel culture. This does not make Jews feel safer.
So Trump's war on the universities, I don't support this at all. I think it's an attack on civil society. And I think it's very clearly motivated by trying to pave the way for, once again, this foreign influence. I think it's evil.
Man, they're playing chess out here. I did not know all that was going on behind the scenes.
And they count on that because they portray it like, oh, this is based. They say, this is the latest narrative. Trump bans the international students. That's meant to bankrupt Harvard. That's the goal, because international students pay full boat. They pay 60 to 80 grand per year. Harvard it's 20% of their student body. That's a lot of money. So if Trump takes their international students, that's like, this is deal making. You don't want to take our pro-Israel curriculum? Well, we'll bankrupt you. Now you have to take the curriculum. But the way it's being portrayed by conservatives is, oh, this is great because now Americans can go to Harvard. Okay, but that's not the intention. And I think when all is said and done, the international students will come back to Harvard. You know, Trump said we want more international students. We want them to stay. We want to give them green cards. So the international students they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
This is just using them as a bludgeon against Harvard. And they're getting conservatives to support it intentionally by branding it as some kind of based, pro-worker, anti-immigration policy, when really that's not what it is.
So either parrot the acceptable political opinion on the Middle East or have your citizenship status revoked. Seems like you have nothing to worry about if you're an American citizen. Wrong. While there are numerous indirect downstream consequences on the American people, there is a direct consequence buried at the end of the report. Desired effect 10. Social media no longer allow the spread of anti-Semitic content. Mirroring the Christian outrage that stemmed from H.R. 6090, a bill that was passed in the House of Representatives and is awaiting action in the Senate, seeks to incorporate the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism into federal law. And by working, they mean changeable, in principle, implying they could adapt the definition to whatever end they see fit. A bill that by definition restricts open discourse of biblical texts and by extension Christian schools of thought, placing a protection mechanism over a religion/ethnicity that is not the founding religion of the country. Arriving to where we are now, where a growing Christian nationalist coalition continues to march forward from the influences of Nick Fuentes, Jay Dyer, Andrew Wilson, Joel Webbon, Stone Choir, and many, many others, who have suffered at differing lengths and intensities of being smeared as anti-Semitic or Islam-aligned for rejecting the Judeo-Christian co-opting of the faith. But now it goes beyond just smears and character assassination, as the strategy is threatening a real legal presence of censorship in the United States that would have a strong impact on the Christian community. And with any law or regulation that imposes restrictions on freedoms, the question to ask is, what if this were used on me? For that, and the numerous other reasons listed in this video, I am 100% against the implementation of